Good morning and welcome to this review of Spindles End by Robin McKinley. Now I hope you can see how pretty this cover is. It's actually kind of etched, so instead of being flat, the flowers have got a bit of texture to them, and it wraps around with flowers and leaves and hedgehogs, and it is not a science fiction. I think Robin McKinley is often called a fantasy writer, but also sometimes she's known as a folklore writer. She does have some pure fantasy books, but many of hers are fairy tale retellings with a much more modern element than many fairy tale retellings have. I am very fond of Robin McKinley. My last classic sci-fi book was so great. I knew that I needed a bit of a change in modality to palette cleanser. So this was a palette cleanser. It is not a small book, and McKinley's writing is so rich, so dense, so full of stuff that 350 odd pages takes a long time to get through, even for me, and I read fast. It is thoroughly recommended though. Her writing is absolutely gorgeous. Now, Spindles End is one of the ones where she's got a retelling of folklore. In this particular case, it is, of course, Sleeping Beauty, Spindle, and it kind of comes together, doesn't it? And she has a real genius for these kinds of retellings, in my opinion. She manages to keep the mythic air. She has a lot of those underlying themes of humanity, which are what make a fairy tale, but she brings in enough modern element that it becomes an enjoyable fantasy that is well written, at the same time as managing to retain a lot, if not all, of the fairy tale element. So one of the things that she does that fairy tales don't do is that she has very good characterization. She has a lot of characters, they're enjoyable. And in fairy tales, your characters tend to be more stereotypes or mythic underliers or two-dimensional. So, how does this wonderful book start? This little book starts very much in fairy tale mode, in a land far, far away. But wait, McKinley does it differently. In her part 1, she describes the Magic Kingdom in which it takes place. And the Magic Kingdom is very much a feature of how it takes place, and she describes how very magical this kingdom is, where you've got magic that accumulates like dust and how you need fairies to dispel it. And the way in which she describes this Magic Kingdom is very light-hearted, almost tongue-in-cheek at times. She is clearly enchanted by her kingdom and her magic systems, enjoying it thoroughly, and wants you to as well. I did very much enjoy that beginning. So I've seen some people who complain about some books with magic systems that they didn't understand the magic system. I think at the great ending where you've got a lot of magic, perhaps they will have that problem. But by then I would imagine they're too enchanted by the book itself to care. In the beginning, it's basically described as wild, random magic that runs everywhere through the kingdom and does all these weird things. It's a lot of fun. So, in this book, divided into parts, part 1 is, after it's set up the kingdom, you meet Catriona, who's a very young woman, who's living with her aunt. Her aunt's a fairy in this very end of the world sort of part of the kingdom. What's it called? Foggy's End? Foggy Bottom, that's it, Foggy Bottom. Sounds like a very English sort of name. And McKinley does live, I believe, in the United Kingdom. So, we've got this kingdom, we've got the king and queen. We talk a little bit about how the rulers get their partners who must be completely magic free because they want a ruler who isn't magic influenced. And this becomes a central part of the plot. So, when the king got married, they found him a wife with no magical connection. She was highborn, but not terribly highborn. And then they waited for something like 16 years with no children. Then they had the daughter. And at that point of part 1, when the actual tale begins, we're told how the queen's kingdom had been small enough that the rulers, her parents, knew most of the people who lived in it, and whenever there was a big thing like a birthday or a naming day, the whole kingdom was invited. So this is a play with the fairy tale, the source fairy tale, where everyone is invited, and the fairy godmother who curses the princess does so because she was the only one who didn't get an invitation through whatever bad luck. Here, she bypasses that part of the fairy tale. The fairy godmother, she isn't a fairy godmother, the evil witch rather, who curses the princess. She's got some backstory with the kingdom, that's why she's angry with it. But the story of how Catriona is at the naming day is a nod to the original part of the fairy tale where the whole kingdom's invited. And that's the sort of thing that McKinley does, and she does it really exceptionally well, in my opinion. So initially the king and queen thought, wow, wouldn't it be a great idea to invite the whole kingdom? And then the king and queen's household managers, and I'm going to imagine event planners, went, no, we can't do it. So instead, they devised this plan that every town could send a representative. So it would still be a huge feast, a huge number of people, but every town, every area had its own representative, drawn by lot, who went. And in Foggy Bottom, it's Catriona who gets nominated, and she goes to the naming day. The naming day is a fiasco, as you would expect, because it's a story of Sleeping Beauty, and the naming day is a fiasco. And in a strange and interesting way, which I won't disclose, Rosie ends up holding the baby, very literally, the princess with the 21 names and the 21 and the 20 gifts, wishes, spells, fairy tale things that were given to her. And we've got this wonderful bit where Catriona is shaking her head over the idiotic wishes that are being given to her, like long lashes and curly hair. She's going, why can't they give her practical wishes? And I think that's probably something that a lot of modern people listening to the original fairy tale going, curly hair? Why are they giving her curly hair? Anyway, Catriona gets to the baby directly after the witch does, and she is inveigled by a fairy on the queen's household to take away the baby and hide her, so that the witch named Pernicia, I don't know, one of those, can't get at her. And she does. She travels home, and along the way she's got this freshly born baby that needs milk, and animals supply milk. Up until then, Catriona had no fairy elements except that she was able to speak to animals, and as a wish to sort of comfort the baby after Pernicia putting the curse on her, she says, you can have my gift of speaking to animals. And that becomes central to the plot too. Now, Robin McKinley herself was very fond of animals. I think she's worked in a couple with horses, maybe other animals, something like that. And this comes through beautifully in this book. You've got animals of all shapes and descriptions, from fox to mice, horses and dogs, and all of them have their part in the story, and again, very well done. So that's the first part. And what have I said about it? Oh yes. Part 2, essentially Rosie and Catriona have made it back to the village, and Rosie grows up as a normal baby and a normal child. She doesn't have any magic about her, as you wouldn't expect from her parents, but it's later discovered that she does have the talking to animals ability. There's no suspicion in the village or anywhere in the kingdom where Rosie is. They call her Rosie because she's got 21 names, and the last one is Briar Rose. So Rosie is a good village name. She gets that. She grows up like any other village kid. No one in the kingdom knows where the princess is. They just know that she's being hidden. McKinley's telling a wonderful story. It's also in part 2 that I made a note of one page that I thought was particularly nicely written. Let's see if I can remember which bit it was. Oh yes, spindles. I need to mention the spindles. So in the original fairy tale, Sleeping Beauty falls into a sleep after pricking her finger on a spindle, just like the evil fairy godmother had foreseen. In this one too, the curse is going to be that she pricks her finger on a steel needle, and as a result, the entire kingdom, all of them are banned. And it's this interesting, enriching thing that McKinley does. Once all the metal spindles are banned, spindles need to be made because you still need to spin, so they make them out of wood. And carving wooden spindles that are beautiful and functional becomes a massive part of the kingdom. It's an export. Many people are very good at it. There's these beautiful heritage spindles, and a wooden spindle becomes a bit of a household protection in the Foggy Bottom household, which is Aunt Catriona, who's now been revealed as a fairy and is a fairy in training, and Rosie, who has no fairying capacity whatsoever and is a headstrong young girl. What was it on this that I wanted to quote? Oh well, it was about spindles apparently. Okay, part 3. Rosie is developing from a child into a teenager, and she's a very interesting and strong-willed one. And that's where this book will really shine for a lot of people, because you've got this fairy tale character who is very much her own character. And McKinley is known to write fairy tales with almost feminist themes. Anyone who cares about the Bechdel, whatever it's called, will probably like this. You've got a large number of women. Most of them are interesting and strong. They often discuss things that aren't men, so that'll work for people. The princesses, or Rosie's developing characteristics, include animal handling, because she can still talk to animals, general willfulness, and she's a wild, strong young woman, so she makes a very good protagonist. And so there's a couple of major studios that we all know and we shan't discuss, who have this thing where they're trying to turn fairy tales into modern girl boss type stories to appeal to a younger audience. They tend to not do well. They tend to completely lose any mythic quantity, and I meant quality, but never mind, any mythic quality or quantity. They lose the mythic elements. They fail to replace it with anything except a passing theme of whatever is socially acceptable at the time. Robin McKinley, I think, is doing here what they're trying to do with their retellings of, I don't know, Beauty and the Beast, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and things like that. What she's got is an actual fairy tale that retains its fairy tale mythic element, but still has more modernistic characters, more modernistic attitudes, so it manages to keep the magic and the beauty, but still tell a good story, which is contemporary in most ways. Very impressive. Not many people can do that. McKinley usually can. Okay, in part 4, right at the end of part 3, as Rosie is 20 years old, approaching her 21st birthday, when this curse is finally going to punch home, a fairy comes from the court. They have found her. If they've found her, that means Pernicious is not far behind or has also found her. And they start putting into play actions to mitigate the curse which is about to land. So right at the end of part 3, this 20-year-old headstrong woman who's never doubted who she was or her place in life. We're told she never even asked about her parents. She knew she was an orphan. And she knew where she belonged was with Aunt and Catriona, so she never really cared too much. Here she finds out that she isn't who she thought she was. She's this princess. And part 4 is the lead up to the princess's 21st birthday, where they're trying to do all these things, and Rosie's a bit lost. There's a subterfuge that's put in place, and I can't do better than say about it that the animals have it right. The animals start to play very heavily in this because they all recognise Rosie as princess, and they gather around her. And they recognise this subterfuge is going along. And their attitude seems to be, it's one of these strange things that humans do that usually make things worse instead of better, but there's nothing we can do about it. And the reader's kind of with the animals, I think. The subterfuge that they enter into is a little bit cray-cray, to be honest, but it makes for a good story. So there's the ball, and there's the confrontation, which is very satisfying and very enjoyable. It plays into mythic stereotypes, bad versus good. It's great. And I'm not going to say anything about it because I think that people should read this book, and spoilering it is probably not the best way to go about that. I will say that with the grand confrontation in the country hall, so many elements of the story come into play that there's too many. The hall itself and its history, the animals in it, Rosie's background, her friends, all of it. And it was so good that after I finished reading it, I read on for a few pages and then I went back and read it again. That good. Okay, what else? Part 5 is about after the ball and how Rosie, with friends, animal and otherwise, go to defeat the evil witch in her lair and save the country. What else can we say about this? There are not love stories as we come to see them. They're certainly not young adult-y type love stories where you get a little bit of scenery and all the rest is him yearning and her yearning or whatever. There is an element of people finding each other, and 2 of the main characters do end up as a couple, but their way to finding that is not agonizing over it. The way to finding it is learning more about themselves. So it's more a matter of people finding themselves, and after they've done that, naturally continuing on to the next part of their life, which is a shared life. Chop chop, go on then. No? Well then. So, pardon me. Here is the bird of much screaming, who as soon as he's here will want to go elsewhere, I imagine. Okay, so, as I was saying, while I do find McKinley's writing amazingly satisfying and her stories very, very good, there is often to her books an element at some point that I'm not totally on board with. And here it's a spoiler, so I don't have my spoiler notice. So if you've read this book, listen along. If you haven't read this book and you think you're likely to, mute it while I'm spoilering. So right at the end, you've got this thing where Rosie and her best friend Peony have transferred places. They're trying to fool the fairy into thinking that Peony is the princess. It doesn't work. Big battles ensue and the ending comes along. The other part of the ending that I really didn't enjoy was that, having defeated the evil princess, Peony goes off continuing to pretend to be the princess, even though her mother, the queen, had recognised from the first time she set eyes on the 2 girls which was the real one, even though all the animals of the kingdom know it. Essentially, Rosie gets to stay in the village and be who she thinks she was, which reminded me a lot of Terry Pratchett's main protagonist in The Players. I can't remember which book. It's one of the Lanka books. He is the son of the king, but he doesn't want to be. He wants to be a player on the road, so he gives up being king and someone else gets to be king. And McKinley does that here as well. I didn't love it. I think it was about modern sensibilities, about people can be whoever they want to be, and that's okay, and it's meant to be a happy ending. And McKinley's happy was Rosie being who she wanted to be, not who she was. But I don't feel that a fairy tale has to be happy ending in the way that everyone gets what they want. I think happy endings sometimes are people not getting what they want, but giving them a chance to grow. We now have the prospect of Rosie living a happy village life, but never becoming anything more that she could be. And there's a lot that she could be. And Peony going off to be an ornamental queen who always says the right thing to everyone. Is that really what your kingdom needs? I'm not sure. McKinley thinks it is. Anyway, aside from that small spoiler, this was a marvellous book. I don't think everyone, or even probably that many people, will agree with me and not enjoy that ending. It's certainly a happy ending in every regards. It's just a little bit too pat, a little bit too little fairy tale, and a little bit, I don't know, modern obvious, I guess. Fairy tales need to have deep darkness, and this one has a lot of deep and a lot of dark, and a lot of the magic's pretty nasty as well, which is perfect. That ending was trying too hard to be a happy ending all around, and it just didn't hit my happy place. However, that's the overarching ending. Right at the end, we find Rosie coming together with the person that she's been in. Has she been in love with? Yeah, I guess you would argue she's been in love with him, and who helped her defeat the evil queen. And that is well written. It's cute. It's kind of enchanting. It isn't overdone. So yeah, overall, 5 out of 5 stars for this book. If it's got a tiny quirk, lots of McKinley's work does. If you like fantasy that is essentially fairy tale retellings, if you like fantasy with strong folktale elements, McKinley is for you, and Spindles End is one of her better ones. If you have read McKinley very much, I'm going to mention something else. This book is not part of a series. Her fairy tales are normally independent. But it does have this weird point where out of nowhere, Rosie and I think maybe Catriona, Rosie and someone start discussing one of McKinley's other books. The Daymar books are Sword and the Crown, the Blue Sword, and then the Crown and the Sword, or the Kingdom and the Crown, whatever. I did not like that. I just saw no point to it. It seemed like someone had thought, oh, wouldn't it be funny if you just threw in Daymar? It's like, it's not funny. It's weird. Daymar, at least in the Blue Sword, is a very specific construct in a very specific world. From the first time I read it, it felt basically like Regency England during its controlling of India phase. The Jewel in the Crown, I think, was a book series that did that really well. I've got this English person who goes out to this India, only India plus magic, and then heads off onto the hills after into a magic kingdom. But there is no way that I can encapsulate in my mind that world meshing with this one. So the fact that Daymar is mentioned, just, it didn't really rock my boat. I've got no idea what she was trying to do there. Other than that, if we're looking at all the Sleeping Beauties, we've got the Charles Perrault fairy tale retellings, translated into English somewhere on that shelf. McKinley does it better. I like the Perrault fairy tales, but McKinley definitely does it better. Oh, hello. And the Brothers Grimm. I don't like the Brothers Grimm. I read a lot of Brothers Grimm when I was young, but they never really rocked my boat. For me, if you're going to have a Sleeping Beauty fairy tale that you need to read, make it this one. It's long, but it's enjoyable. It's incredibly well written. Thank you for watching me talk about this cute, elaborate, well-written, very satisfying fairy tale. Have a great day and read good books.